Hi folks, thank you for being my very small crowd today. I appreciate it. I'm going to talk a little bit about communities of practice for humanitarians. I've worked in the non-profit sector for over 20 years and I just want to share a bit of what I've learned. So I work for an organisation called NetHope. We're a community of digital and tech professionals in the non-profit sector. And you can see there on the slide some of the organisations that we work with. So we have at the moment we have 68 members. As you can see, it's some of the big sort of household names, I guess, in the humanitarian and development sector. You know, the Save the Children's and the Oxfams and those organisations that you've heard of. And then probably quite a few organisations that are new to you as well. There's lots of organisations doing good work in this sector that aren't very well known, I guess, and it's because they're not necessarily fundraising from the public. But those are the organisations that we're working with. So across all of our members, there's around 800,000 staff, but obviously not all of those are engaged in our community. So we're working with the tech folks. And we're working with people across 190 countries. And we also have 50 tech partners that we work with as well. So some of the organisations are, for example, Cisco, Microsoft, ServiceNow, companies like that that work with us and support us in different ways. Sometimes offering things to our members in terms of pro bono support or offers or discounts and things like that. And sometimes offering us sponsorship as an organisation. So some of the things that are interesting about learning in the humanitarian sector. A lot of the way that people learn in the humanitarian sector is really very on the job. Everything becomes sort of quite context specific, I think, in the humanitarian sector because every emergency is different. And so a really big part of being prepared for an emergency is having your network ready to go, having a really good network of experts that you can call upon to support you and give you different pieces of advice. So while there are kind of courses and certifications and things like that people do in the humanitarian sector, really that kind of like peer learning and working through problems together is a really big part of how humanitarians learn. They're learning on the job. They're often learning on the move. People get deployed to different locations. They also move a lot between organisations. There's not the same sort of competition, I guess, that you see necessarily between corporate companies. There's a lot of collaboration between organisations and people move between. Learning is often very underfunded and under-resourced as well, as you can imagine. Everything's happening on a shoestring, so the learning's the first thing that goes out the window. So actually kind of networks and communities of practice are a really effective way for people in the humanitarian sector to learn. And this is a piece of research that we did actually at my last organisation. So I used to work for an organisation called the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. We surveyed between 4,000 and 5,000 people that used one of our platforms there as to some of the main barriers that they had to learning. And what's interesting as well is the thing about lack of interesting and relevant opportunities. And I think there's huge numbers of kind of courses and things out there for humanitarians, but there just never will be the perfect course to kind of help you through a particular emergency that you're dealing with, which is why our communities of practice are really important. And so NetHope, my organisation, is not by any means the only community of practice in the humanitarian and development sector. So I just wanted to give a few examples of some of the other ones that are out there. So for any kind of area of technical expertise in the humanitarian sector, you'll typically find that there is a community working on that. So over here, we've got CCHN, which is focusing on humanitarian negotiation. So helping people to negotiate in humanitarian situations to gain access, for example, to people that need support. Calp up here works on cash learning. So cash and voucher assistance is a kind of new area of humanitarian work, and they're supporting people to understand what that's all about. There's a specific network for education in emergencies. This one here, GISF, focuses on security. There's one for child protection. So you'll find that there are kind of equivalent communities for all of these different kind of technical areas where people get together across all of those different organisations that I showed you. And same survey from my last organisation. You can see some of the top 5 areas of interest for humanitarian learning there. So food security and livelihoods, health, protection, diversity and inclusion, project management and education were some of the areas that came out top in that survey that we did. And at NetHope, so the organisation that I work for, as I mentioned, we are focused very much on IT and the use of digital tools in the humanitarian sector. So our community is a kind of combination of back office IT people, so people that have, they're basically running all the back office IT for great big international organisations, but with a couple of extra tricky factors in there, which are firstly lack of resources, and secondly the fact that they're operating in lots of difficult contexts alongside lots of perfectly ordinary contexts. So they have lots to be dealing with at the same time. And then also in the same community we have people that are developing digital tools for use in humanitarian action. So some examples of those might be there's a tool which maps out food stocks globally, so that all different agencies working across the globe can register what food stocks they have in which locations in order that there can be an overview for organisations to see. Or there are kind of apps for sending out alerts and coordinating responders in an emergency. So we have lots of different types of IT specialists in our community, and what we're increasingly finding is that across all of the different kind of technical areas that I mentioned before, IT and digital is emerging as a bit of a kind of a cross-cutting theme. So you'll have people that are kind of tech experts in these areas increasingly coming into our community. And so for that reason, we have lots of different kind of working groups and chapters within our community. We have 6 regional chapters that people can join. We have 12 different working groups. And these are some examples of some of the topics. So some people working on connectivity in crises, connectivity in remote areas or for refugee camps and things like that. Technological tools used for emergency response, cybersecurity, climate tech, AI, which is just a buzzword across every sector, of course. So lots of different areas that our community members are focused on through the different groups that we set up. Now, of course, most of the time, what our organisations are responding to are all the emergencies that you see in the news and lots of the ones that you don't see in the news, things like Sudan and things that don't crop up as much in the news but are actually hugely important events that are going on. That's mostly what our folks are working on. But over the past few months, we've had a different kind of crisis affecting our community. And it might not be something you've seen in the news, or it might be, but obviously there's been a lot going on in the US recently. And I didn't realise this at all, that it was to this extent, but the US was funding 42% of humanitarian aid worldwide, which is just massive. And the extent of that sort of dependency on US funding, I had no idea of until just a few months ago. And anyway, that aid has largely been removed now, so our sector is collapsing around our ears. So that's been a sort of something that's been cropping up in our community. And of course, because our guys are the tech guys, we're not in our community seeing so much of the really kind of like frontline effects of that. For example, 50,000 Kenyan health workers lost their jobs overnight. People's ARVs have been cancelled and all sorts of things. But in our community, we're talking much more about the impact on organisationals, tech tools and things like that. But it's definitely had an effect, and it's been quite an interesting few months since that happened. I don't know why this slide is so busy, sorry about that. But we basically, since January, had a bit of a pivot in our community. And we almost had to kind of run in two streams at once. So on the one hand, we've continued all of our usual business, because some of our organisations are much less affected. For example, if all of their funding came from the UK government, then they may have been less affected, like WaterAid, for example, not barely affected at all. But at the same time, some of our organisations have lost up to, I think the worst affected was like 80% of their funding. So they are dramatically downsizing. And you'll be having meetings in your community, and then the person who was in your meeting literally isn't there the next day because they've been one of the people laid off. So huge numbers of layoffs. And one thing that we found is that we ended up running twice weekly meetings for our most senior folk across all of those organisations. And in a way, it surprised us because we thought, people kind of at C-suite level, maybe they're just too busy to be involved in these meetings at this time. But actually, they found it even more useful than usual because it was their one chance to sort of connect with other leaders and to share and almost have kind of group therapy as they're having to take apart their global teams. So we've had many more meetings recently. We set up a roster because we knew that so many people were leaving the sector, but that all of those skills and digital skills are still needed. So we're trying to capture all of that talent in a database as it leaves the sector. We've created lots of guidance documents and things. We met with all of our tech partners to help them understand the situation so that they could renegotiate contracts with our members. So we did many different things in response to that. I'm coming to the end of my thing here. And we're still very much in the midst of it, to be honest. So what we're learning as we go along. It's not kind of a case of the lessons have been learned. We're still busy with it. But one thing we definitely learned was that it wasn't so much just the technical content, it was also the kind of group therapy that was really important to people in that time. We're learning what the impact of mass layoffs is, like holes appearing in your communities here and there, but the fact that C-suite people are actually attending meetings much more often in order to keep a pulse on the wider sector. We're learning what it's like to have kind of two extremes in your community, people that are absolutely business as usual at the same time as those who are really falling apart and trying to kind of pivot what we're offering for that. Yeah, and I think one thing that is kind of a hopeful note, I suppose, is that in these times of crisis, it feels like the importance of community increases for our members. It feels like there's a moment where organisations want to collaborate on tangible things more. They want to think, how can they share their systems between organisations? So what projects can they do which are going to hopefully dramatically reduce costs across organisations? There's an appetite for collaboration that we haven't seen before. So we're really hoping that that's something that we can build on in what is a really difficult time for the sector. And that's me done. Thank you for listening.